Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is The World Next Year, and with us to talk about it is Christopher Dickey of the Daily Beast, Patrick Smith of the Africa Report, and you have a little primer I know you brought with us here.
That's right.
Africa in 2014.
All you need to know in 220 well-argued pages on your newsstands now.
A thick tome.
It's very thick.
Lila Jacinto of France24.com and Craig Capitas of Quartz and The Atlantic. 2014, we were mentioning in part one of our discussion, Brazil. It's also going to be a big year for another emerging giant. In August, Turkish voters, for the first time, will directly elect their president. The charismatic prime minister, who's been in power for a decade, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, appears to be a shoo-in, although he's coming off the stiffest challenge to his 10-year reign with mass protests that started over the demolition of a park in Istanbul, but then spread to other cities.
Minorities are trying to rule over the majority. The privileged are trying to dominate victims, and they are trying to regain their privileges. We know what's really behind these dirty games they play as they pretend to care for trees, the environment, Gezi Park.
Mr. Dickey, we began with conspiracy theories about the World Cup draw. Here there's a conspiracy that there is a sinister plot behind all those who wanted to save Taksim Park.
Well, you know, there probably was some kind of encouragement for the protests after a while. But like many things, I think the protests began in earnestly and seriously for the purpose of saving that park. I mean, if you go to Istanbul or any major city in Ankara, the sense of urban blight closing in on you is enormous. And I think that that was probably genuine. The problem Erdogan is going to face is that he's just been in power a very long time. You know, after a while, no matter how much you can say you offered the people and did for the people and can prove it, and certainly the economy of Turkey is a hell of a lot better off now than it was before he came in, people just get tired of you. And I think that was partly reflected in those protests. And he may well win these presidential elections, but I think he's going to find himself facing much more of an uphill battle in the near future than he ever anticipated.
Do you agree, Craig Capitas, there really will be an uphill battle?
I think it will be. What I'm interested to see if he will be clinically diagnosed with a case of Mugabe-itis, which seems to be the trend these days. The young people of Turkey, the engine of their growth and of their future, would like to see him go.
Is that the case, though?
Yes.
Saying that the country's much better off than it was?
Well, they are, but there's a lot of young people there.
He's got a finishing line as well. You know, 2023 is the finishing line, and that's 100 years of the Turkish Republic, the post-Ottoman, settlement, if you like. That's what he's aiming at, by all accounts, is what the Turkish opposition say. And unfortunately for them, the Turkish opposition are pretty weak and divided, so they're not likely to put up much of a challenge. But I think his problem is how he deals with Gül, because Gül is a far more popular, voter-friendly figure, and the likelihood is they may well change places. So they'll do a kind of Putin swap, but this time it may be that the current president, Gül, will then take over the powerful job of prime minister and keep a constraint on Erdogan. And that's what a lot of Turks do.
One thing to bear in mind, he may win. He's very likely to win the presidential election next year. But it's not the post that he wanted.
He wanted
he wanted to change the
constitution,
to have a US-style office, and he did not get that because even though the opposition is fractured, they did not manage to pass. They went through 2 deadlines in order to change that constitution. If he needs to get the constitution, and if he wants to be the president that he wants to be, that would have to wait for 2015 if the AK party gets enough of a majority in parliament for the party to just change the constitution. So, domestically, it does not look as strong as we thought it would be last year. And of course, on the international, on the domestic front, his policy in Syria is extremely unpopular with the Turkish population. And Syria is sitting right at Turkey's border, and with the Syrian situation looking like there is really no solution in sight, the Turkish people have no stomach for this. So I don't think this tough mayor of Istanbul gets into 2014 as strongly as he did into 2013.
Don't forget, Erdogan still has a lot of kebab on his face for not winning the Olympics. That was huge. As you pointed out, they wanted those Olympics to celebrate as a celebratory thing for the end of Ottoman rule. And they were counting on it because this, I believe, was their 5th attempt to get the Olympics. And they thought they were going to win it. And from what I hear from people inside the IOC and in Istanbul, it's the reason they didn't win it was because of what Erdogan did in that park. They were a shoo-in.
All right, we were mentioning voter fatigue on this old continent we call Europe, with growth that's anemic, unemployment high. It seems as though most incumbents are having a tough time of it, but not all of them. Angela Merkel, uncharacteristically cheerful on election night back in September. And why not? Her CDU garnering a whopping 42% of the vote. Not bad, getting twice re-elected despite a financial crisis.
I don't have much to say. I'm simply saying thank you again. I wish everyone a beautiful evening. Today we're going to party, and from tomorrow it's back to work again.
Back to work again. She will continue to practice her no surprises brand of centrist politics in a grand coalition with the Social Democrats. But contrast that, if you will, with the rude shock that could jolt Europe on the morning of May the 26th, 2014. Countries like France could awaken to news that the far-right National Front has polled tops of elections to the European Parliament. And even though its leader, Marine Le Pen, insists she's no longer extreme right, well, old habits die hard, like back in October when French hostages were released after a 3-year-old ordeal in the Sahara.
I felt uncomfortable when I saw these images, and I don't think I was the only one. The two of them with unusual beards. They were strangely dressed. Then the hostage whose face was covered. They perhaps need to provide an explanation, because I think all of this has left French people feeling very uneasy.
And the old dog whistle messages. Lila Jacinto, do you see Marine Le Pen, as some polls suggest, finishing top in France when there's those European elections come May?
Well, that's what the polls have been saying all of last year. So, we're just going to have to wait and watch. It's probably likely.
Probably likely. Christopher Dickey, I notice you're sporting a beard.
I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East with suspicious people.
But do you sense, Christopher, you've lived, more seriously, you've spent a lot of time in France. Do you sense the tone of the conversation in France has changed over the last few years?
Yeah, I think that what's happened really is that Marine Le Pen has taken the National Front and moved it a bit toward the center. But then the right-wing party, Sarkozy's party, the UMP, moved very far to the right. In fact, on some issues, to the right of Marine Le Pen, and they started to make her look good. She's a much more pleasant face and candidate than her father was. And let's also remember that her father made it into the second round of the presidential elections in 2002. It's not like totally unprecedented that people vote for the National Front. So I would not be surprised if they had big gains in these elections for the European Parliament. But what does the European Parliament mean? It's just basically an advance, a foretaste of what's to come. And the question is, will she have the party organization? Will the socialists be so weak? Will the UMP be so divided that in 2017 she'll really have a shot at the presidency?
It's not
that I doubt.
it's not just France. We see a rise of the far right. And as Christopher is saying, yes, it's true the European Parliament is a weak institution. They don't have very much power. But if Le Pen does as she says she will, and that is to say, forges an alliance in the European Parliament with the Dutch far right leader, Geert Wilders, what will that mean for the continent?
Look, the European Parliament is a gormless institution that has the shelf life of the Esperanto language. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. What Le Pen is hoping for here is that she can use this as a springboard, as Chris correctly pointed out, of whether this can help her garner votes back home here.
And organization.
And the organization. And I believe the jury, the proverbial jury, is out on that question right now. I don't think she can. I hope she can't.
But also, I think that this whole game with people like Geert Wilders is going to hurt her. She's trying to position herself in a moderate mold. Wilders is a very strange dude. I think being associated with him is problematic, but being associated with the other far-right parties in Europe would be completely poisonous for her.
He has a great barber, though.
Wilders.
Yeah.
He dyes his hair.
No.
Yeah, he does. I asked him.
Shock. Grecian formula?
But Patrick Smith,
No,
Christopher
blonde,
Dickey,
peroxide.
Christopher Dickey making the point, hair comments aside, about
I'm sensitive about hair, actually.
It's about the hair.
about the fact that it will make her look bad if she's painted with these people who still say they are far right.
It's a bit of a dilemma for the fascists of Europe, just, who to really get into bed with. I think that's the problem. I mean,
But their numbers are growing.
I think the bed is getting a bit bigger, as Christopher said. The UMP of sort of stretching it out a bit. So it's gone from a sort of queen size to a king size. The other problem, I think, is formally, you'd get these pretty substantial Front National votes in the south of France. And the journalists would go down to a sort of little village and they'd say, who's voting for the National Front around here? And they'd say, no one at all. It's absolutely disgusting. These people are like the Nazis. We couldn't possibly vote for them. We're in favor of the resistance and so on. And then you'd find they get a 30% turnout. So what is very disturbing about all this is the public discourse is getting more fascistic, more prejudice, racially prejudiced, and the whole sort of public punishment of voting for far-right parties is diminishing. And I think so the atmosphere and the climate of European politics is shifting very far, quite rapidly to the right.
Leo Jacinto, on a personal basis, do you feel as though it's become acceptable to openly say I'm far right?
Definitely, absolutely. You see the coverage we're going to have a local election next year, and you have even people you wouldn't imagine saying voting for Front National. People of North African origins who will be on camera saying that we voted for.
You're
Front
right,
National.
and part of this, I believe, over what we're going to see more of is the conventional wisdom of political correctness in Europe. There was an amazing event by my mind's eye a few days ago in London where a shopkeeper was hauled in and held in police custody for 12 hours, had all his computers taken, jailed, and it was all because he mentioned in his shop that he called his computer Nelson Mandela because it took so long to shut down. This is a big story in England. And all of these right-wing people went to rally behind this guy who didn't want them rallying behind him. And it begged the question, what if he had called his computer Fidel Castro? Or what if he had called
Osama bin Laden
or Francisco Franco? There's this new sense of political correctness, a lot of it coming out of the European Parliament, about what people are supposed to say and what they're supposed to do. And this pisses a lot of folks off. So I think that's helping engender this frightening trend.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if there is a significant block of this extreme or far right in the European Parliament, the unifying force among them is that they hate Europe. They hate the idea of the united Europe.
right.
I mean, that's the uniting issue among them. Nobody says, "Oh, we've all gotten together to be racist together."
Yeah.
No, it's we hate Europe.
Of course, identity politics isn't always far right, and sometimes there are nationalist movements that are pro-Europe. Catalonia comes to mind, Flanders, and next September 18th, Scots go to the poll to answer the following question: should Scotland be an independent country?
Now it's time for the nation of Scotland to exercise its right to self-determination, to choose our own government, and to build something very special here. And I hope we'll grab the opportunity with both hands. We'll say yes, or oui, certainement.
Is Alex Salmond of the Scottish National Party going to get his wish?
I think it's going to be a lot closer than people expect. And it frightens both political parties, actually, the two big political parties in Britain in equal measure. The Conservatives, because if they preside over a referendum which effectively cuts the Union in half, and after all, that's the whole point of the Conservative Party, it's the Conservative and Unionist Party, and they cede independence to Scotland, that's a huge minus for Cameron. For the Labour Party, it's an existential question, because the Labour Party without Scotland would be unable, by all means on present standing, to win another national election in England. It doesn't have the votes in England right now, based on historical trends for the last 30, 40 years. So it's a pretty big deal for both parties. So weirdly, they're both trying to sort of marshal forces against it.
And why is it close?
Why is it close? Because for a lot of Scots, it's a sort of moral issue, an issue of national sovereignty, getting back at the ghastly English after all these years. And I think that's something probably a lot of your viewers may be able to identify with, and the Scots are certainly very, very keen on that. I've got a couple of Scottish friends here in Paris, and they say, look, yeah, you know, our hearts say, yeah, vote for independence, and then we look at the economics of it and we say, no, our heads say definitely not. So I think it is going to be close. I think it's going to be a battle between the hearts and the heads.
All right, we'll find out in September. Over in India, identity politics of a different sort will come to a head when the world's largest democracy heads to the polls in the spring. After a decade of economic boom, growth has tapered, inflation has soared, and the Hindu nationalist BJP, led by the charismatic governor of Gujarat, Narendra Modi, is eyeing a return to power.
In 2014, we need a dream team. The country needs a dream team, not a dirty team. Listen, brothers and sisters. Bring the dream team to power in 2014 and let the country progress.
Is there a parallel to be drawn by the conversation we're having in Europe and the conversation that's going on in India?
Well, not really. I mean, it's not so much identity politics as much as the fatigue in India over corruption and the fatigue with the Congress party. You know, both these are major national parties, and you know, one is just the giant that is trying to bring out another ancestor, another heir of the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty, and it's just not working. You know, identity would come in later, where there will be all sorts of backroom dealings with regional parties and caste parties. But the two big players on the scene for this election are very much national parties.
But we talked about it being acceptable to say far-right things in France. Here you've got the major candidate, and he's very popular, who on his watch back in 2002 presided over the massacre of Muslims.
Absolutely. And for the international community and for the civil rights movements and human rights groups, this is going to be, this is something that they would not have imagined. Now, Narendra Modi has a travel ban in the U.S. You know, he cannot get a visa to the U.S. because of his involvement with the Gujarat massacre, which was documented by human rights groups. There is a House resolution in Congress right now to extend the ban. I doubt that's going to happen. I doubt the U.S. is going to be able to stop, the future prime minister of India from traveling. But, for people who have been in civil society, this is going to be a very bleak and dark outcome.
All right. There could be a change, though, in Indian politics with Arvind Kejriwal. We saw that in the local elections in Delhi, his new anti-corruption party there polled a surprise second.
True, it's the Aam Aadmi Party, which means a common man, and that's a great name, I have to tell you. Did surprisingly well, but remember, this is just New Delhi. This is a party that is just a year old. So definitely Kejriwal has captured the urban imagination. But India is a country where 70% are in the rural areas. So. There's no saying what sort of standing and what is his base outside of the urban areas. I think maybe we'll have to watch whether his party would get into a coalition. If he gets into a coalition with the BJP, a lot of people are going to be put off with that. On the other hand, he's an anti-corruption man. His platform is anti-corruption. He cannot possibly go into a coalition with the Congress. But as yet, this party is not on the national mainstream.
Your topic here of identity politics raises another issue that will, I believe, become a major issue in the coming year. It has to do with individuals don't want to be born where they're supposed to be born. And a number of industries have grown up. Right now in the United States, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 million or more people actually travel to the United States every year to be born there and get the passport. And there's businesses that have started in California and other parts of the United States that bring people over so their children can be born there. There's been some cracking down on this, but legally they can't. And I was talking to some lawyers a few days ago, and they were telling me that this is now happening in other parts of the world as well, where those with means, we're talking about China, and the Chinese who have means, they will fly to the United States and have a child there.
So it's a story of globalization.
Globalization, kind of.
People searching for their identity. In the search of it.
Yeah.
Before we go, I'd like our panel to help us here with their suggestion of what to arm ourselves with for the year to come. Leela Jacinta.
In terms of a book,
yes,
I recommend. I have to admit, this is a friend's book, but I'm very honest about whether my friends write good books or not. This is a book called The Coolie Woman. It's called The Odyssey of Indenture by Gayatri Bahadur. She is an Indo-Caribbean born in Guyana, and she actually traces her great-grandmother who arrived in the British colony to work in the plantation. This is just after the abolition of slavery, when indentured labor came in. And all the family had, the only information they had was the great-grandmother arrived alone on the ship, a single woman pregnant. So it's a very compelling story, a story of indentured labor, and also a story about women and sex in the new territories of the British colony.
Coolie Woman is the name of the book. Christopher Dickey, you're recommending a movie.
Well, yes, based on a book. One of the most interesting stories last year was the whole story of the cache of artwork found in Munich, which was just a little fraction of the artwork that was looted by the Nazis. There's a movie called Monuments Men that is about the true story of the people in the American Army whose business it was to try and find all, or at least as much as they could, of the artworks of Europe that had been looted by the Nazis. And I think it's going to be a good thriller. It's got a great cast, Matt Damon, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. It's coming out in February.
Patrick Smith?
Yeah, well, I would recommend our viewers go back to the 19th century. There's a very good book written by Robert Harris called An Officer and a Spy, and it's about the Dreyfus affair. I'm sure French students need no introduction to that. Some of us Anglo-Saxons are a bit rusty on the history, but Harris tells it absolutely compellingly. It sets it as a political thriller, which it is. And what strikes me is just there are so many commonalities. You've got this one whistleblower who wants to expose, who first is right in favour of the prosecution of Dreyfus and drags Dreyfus in front of the generals, and then suddenly realises it's all a lie, and all the implications and manifestations of that, and fights through the French bureaucracy. And the great thing is, as we all know, he eventually proves the lie to be just that, and Dreyfus is pardoned. He does actually want his rank back, but but it's just to me a wonderful story about whistleblowing. It's an eternal pursuit.
And of course, it's in the build-up to an event that is taking place 100 years ago this year, Craig Capitis.
Right. World War I. The aptly named book, The Sleepwalkers, How Europe Went to War in 1914 by the Cambridge historian Christopher Clark. Absolute must reading. This is the story of how multipolar problems that political leaders say they have a handle on, read Iran, etc., have a way of atomizing into one violent eruption. And the Sleepwalkers, again, the aptly named Sleepwalkers, is a parable for what might also happen for the next Guns of August.
Let's hope it's a cautionary tale. Craig Kapitis, I want to thank you. I want to thank Patrick Smith, Christopher Dickey, Leela Jacinto. Thank you for joining us for this edition of The World Next Year. Let's hope it's a happy one for you. Stay with us right here on France 24.